It was our anniversary. I spent weeks preparing for this day, piecing together fragments of our memories into something tangible, something that spoke of love, of time shared, and of the bond one thought we still had. The scrapbook wasn't just a collection of photos and mementos. It was a timeline of us, a physical reminder of everything we built together. Every page was handcrafted with care, every note written with the hope that this would rekindle what seemed to be fading. When Rachel walked into the room that evening, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, my heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She had been distant lately, her smiles more forced, her laughter reserved for others. But tonight, I hoped, would be different. "What's this?" she asked, her tone flat as she eyed the wrapped gift on the dining table. "It's for you," I said, trying to mask my nerves with a smile. "Happy anniversary." She hesitated, then sighed, peeling back the wrapping paper with a disinterested air. When the scrapbook emerged, her eyebrows raised slightly, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of appreciation. But it disappeared as quickly as it came. "A scrapbook?" she said, flipping through the pages with a disdainful chuckle. "Seriously, Adam? This is what you spent your time on?" Her words cut deeper than I expected. "I thought you'd like it," I said, my voice quieter now. "Like it?" She scoffed, tossing the book onto the table as if it were worthless. "What am I supposed to do with this? You're so useless sometimes, Adam." I blinked, the sting of her words settling into my chest. I wanted to defend myself, to tell her how much thought and effort I'd poured into that gift. But the fight drained out of me as she continued. "Listen," she said, crossing her arms. "I've been meaning to tell you something." Here it was. The moment I'd been dreading but couldn't quite put into words. "I'm leaving," she said bluntly. "There's nothing here for me anymore. I need someone who actually makes me feel alive. And I found that. With Eric." Eric. The name hit me like a freight train. I'd suspected something, the late nights, the unexplained absences, but hearing it confirmed felt like the floor was being ripped out from under me. "He's 20 years old, Rachel," I said, managing to keep my voice steady. "What could he possibly offer you?" She smirked, brushing past me to grab her coat. "More than you ever did," she said. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Adam. Just accept it. We're done." I stood there, frozen in place as she made her way to the door. But then, a strange calm washed over me. "Rachel," I said, my voice stopping her in her tracks. She turned, eyebrows raised. "Thank you," I said simply, picking up the scrapbook from the table. She frowned, clearly puzzled. "For what?" I held the book close to my chest, forcing a small smile. "For making things clear." She rolled her eyes and walked out, leaving me alone in the silence of our once shared home. As the door closed behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The hurt was there, sharp and unrelenting, but so was something else. Resolve. I walked to my desk, placing the scrapbook down gently. Opening it, I flipped to the back cover, where a small, discreet tracking device was embedded beneath the lining. This wasn't just a gift. It was a carefully planned piece of evidence. Rachel had underestimated me, dismissed me as the useless man she'd grown tired of. But what she didn't know was that I'd suspected her betrayal for weeks, and this scrapbook was my way of confirming it. Embedded in its pages were records of her questionable financial transactions, subtle clues I'd gathered over time. Sitting there in the quiet of our empty home, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. Rachel thought she was walking away scot-free, leaving me to pick up the pieces of a broken marriage. But she had no idea what was coming. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The silence in the house was deafening after Rachel left, her biting words still echoing in my mind. I stood there for a while, staring at the door she had walked out of, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. But I wasn't defeated. Hurt, yes, but not broken. I picked up the scrapbook from the table and carried it to my desk. Sitting down, I opened it slowly, flipping through the pages that now felt less like a gift and more like a tool of reckoning. My hands traced over the photos and notes, the moments of joy and love I had hoped would remind Rachel of what we once had. Now, they served a different purpose. I reached the back cover, where the hidden pocket lay. Peeling back the carefully glued lining, I revealed the small tracking device nestled inside. It was a simple, discreet piece of technology, the kind I'd learned to use during my years dabbling in tech consultancy. Rachel had mocked me for spending too much time on gadgets and useless projects. Little did she know, one of those projects was now the linchpin in uncovering her betrayal. The tracker was live, sending signals to my laptop. I opened the monitoring software, and within seconds, a map appeared on the screen. A blinking dot showed Rachel's current location, a luxury condo on the other side of town. No doubt Eric's place. I clenched my jaw but forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for rash decisions. I needed to be methodical, precise. I scrolled through another file on my computer, financial records. Weeks ago, when I first noticed Rachel's behavior changing, I started paying closer attention to our joint accounts. There were transactions that didn't add up, dinners at expensive restaurants I'd never been to, gifts I hadn't received, withdrawals that seemed excessive. I had copied every suspicious detail into a private folder, each line item a breadcrumb leading me closer to the truth. The scrapbook had been my final test. If Rachel accepted it with genuine warmth, I might have held on to hope. But her reaction, her mockery and disdain, had confirmed what I already suspected. She was done with me, and she had no qualms about showing it. Now, as I pieced together the evidence of her infidelity, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Rachel thought she was in control, that she could walk away unscathed, leaving me to wallow in the wreckage of our marriage. But she was wrong. This time, I would dictate the terms. I spent hours organizing everything, creating a timeline of events and a clear picture of her betrayal. The financial records, the tracking data, even screenshots of her social media posts where she subtly flaunted her new lifestyle. It all painted a damning portrait. By the time I finished, the file was comprehensive enough to leave no room for doubt. As the night wore on, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I should have felt anger, rage even, but what I felt was resolve. Rachel's cruelty and Eric's arrogance had fueled something in me, a determination to ensure that their actions had consequences. Before going to bed, I made a call to an old friend, Samantha, who happened to be a lawyer. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I knew she was the right person to help me navigate this. When she picked up, her voice was warm but cautious. "Adam? It's been ages. What's going on?" I hesitated for a moment, then said, "I need your help, Sam. It's about Rachel." The conversation that followed was brief but productive. I outlined the situation, keeping my emotions in check as I explained the evidence I'd gathered. Samantha didn't judge or ask unnecessary questions. She simply listened, her tone professional as she offered advice. "You've done your homework," she said, a note of admiration in her voice. "Bring everything to my office tomorrow. We'll go through it together and figure out the best way forward." After hanging up, I felt a sense of relief. I wasn't alone in this. With Samantha's guidance, I could ensure that Rachel's actions wouldn't go unnoticed or unchallenged. I closed the laptop and placed the scrapbook back on the desk. It had served its purpose, not as a symbol of love, but as a catalyst for change. As I turned out the lights and headed to bed, I felt the first stirrings of hope. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something new, something stronger. Rachel might have walked out, but I was the one taking control now. Rachel moved out the following day with an air of triumph that was hard to ignore. She didn't bother with subtlety. The sleek car that pulled into our driveway was undoubtedly Eric's. He leaned against it with a smug grin, his confidence that of someone who thought he'd won some grand prize. Rachel strutted out with her designer bags and a dismissive wave over her shoulder, as if she were leaving behind nothing more than an inconvenient phase of her life. "Don't wait up, Adam," she called mockingly. "I'm moving on to better things." I stood at the doorway, keeping my expression neutral, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing any pain. Instead, I nodded and stepped back inside, closing the door on the spectacle. What Rachel didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that their overconfidence was exactly what I had been waiting for. Rachel's newfound freedom was short-lived as anything resembling subtlety. Within days, Her social media accounts were a highlight reel of her luxurious new life with Eric. She posted pictures of lavish dinners, expensive gifts, and weekend getaways. The captions were dripping with self-congratulation, each one a not-so-veiled attempt to flaunt her upgrade to anyone who cared to watch. She really thinks she's untouchable, I muttered to myself, scrolling through the photos on my laptop. The tracking device in the scrapbook provided even more details. Every time Rachel or Eric moved, I could see it. Trips to luxury boutiques, nights at five-star hotels, and visits to exclusive events. The evidence was practically falling into my lap. Her audacity didn't end with social media. Mutual friends reached out, some genuinely concerned, others eager for gossip. "Adam, have you seen what Rachel's been up to?" they would ask, forwarding screenshots of her posts. I played the part of the stoic ex, shrugging off their questions and changing the subject. I didn't need their pity or their validation. I had my plan, and it was unfolding perfectly. Meanwhile, Eric wasn't just indulging Rachel's fantasies, he was amplifying them. He bought her expensive jewelry, whisked her away on spontaneous trips, and played the role of the attentive lover. But Eric didn't seem to realize that his spending was as much a liability as it was a gesture of affection. Each purchase added to the growing list of evidence, creating a financial trail that painted a clear picture of their excess. I documented everything, updating the file I had shared with Samantha. Every extravagant purchase, every transaction linked to our joint accounts, and every social media post went into the folder. The timeline was becoming undeniable, a narrative of betrayal and recklessness that would be impossible for Rachel to refute. One evening, as I reviewed the latest updates from the tracking software, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim amusement. Rachel was so caught up in her new life that she didn't realize the precarious position she was in. Her arrogance blinded her to the consequences, and Eric's naivety only added fuel to the fire. "She thinks she's won," I said aloud, shaking my head. "But she hasn't even seen the game yet." Despite my focus on gathering evidence, I made a point to maintain my routine. I went to work, met with friends, and carried on as if nothing had changed. If anyone asked about Rachel, I kept my responses vague, redirecting the conversation to safer topics. The less attention I drew to the situation, the better. One night, as I sat on the couch with a glass of whiskey, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Samantha. "Your file is solid, Adam. This is more than enough to protect your assets and expose her actions. Let me know when you're ready to proceed." I stared at the screen, feeling a surge of vindication. The work I had put in was paying off, and the endgame was within reach. But I knew I needed to be patient. Rachel's overconfidence was her weakness, and I intended to use it against her. In the days that followed, Rachel's behavior grew even bolder. She hosted a small gathering at Eric's condo, inviting mutual acquaintances to show off her new life. Photos from the party surfaced online, each one more incriminating than the last. The guests might have been impressed, but I saw through the facade. Beneath the glitz and glamour was a woman desperately trying to convince herself that she had made the right choice. As I watched her parade her new life for the world to see, I couldn't help but feel a mix of pity and satisfaction. Rachel was building a house of cards, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. And when it did, she would have no one to blame but herself. The days following Rachel's over-the-top displays of indulgence were a whirlwind of preparation. While she flaunted her so-called freedom and Eric paraded her around like a trophy, I buried myself in the meticulous task of organizing every scrap of evidence. My office became my war room, the desk piled high with printouts, screenshots, and legal notes. The tracker in the scrapbook provided real-time updates, mapping Rachel's movements with unsettling precision. Her favorite haunts became predictable: luxury boutiques, high-end restaurants, and private parties. Eric was right there with her, his flashy purchases adding to the financial trail. Each transaction was another piece of the puzzle, further confirming their reckless behavior. I forwarded the updates to Samantha, who was proving to be an invaluable ally. She combed through the evidence with the expertise of someone who had seen it all before, her sharp eye catching even the smallest discrepancies. "Adam," she said during one of our meetings, "this isn't just a case of infidelity. It's financial abuse. You've been funding her lifestyle, even while she's parading around with Eric. Judges don't look kindly on this kind of behavior. Her words were a balm to my battered pride. It wasn't just about exposing Rachel's betrayal anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity and ensuring that she couldn't continue to exploit me. Samantha helped me compile a comprehensive file. It included bank statements highlighting unauthorized withdrawals and extravagant spending, social media posts that showed Rachel and Eric's activities, complete with timestamps and locations, the tracker data, which corroborated the timeline of their escapades, screenshots of text messages and emails I had managed to recover, revealing Rachel's plans with Eric and her dismissive attitude toward me. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of her deception and irresponsibility. While working on the case, I couldn't help but reflect on how we had gotten here. Rachel and I had once shared a life built on trust, or so I thought. Looking back, I realized there had been cracks in the foundation for a long time. Her increasing disdain for my efforts, her dismissive attitude toward our relationship, and her constant need for validation outside of our marriage were all signs I had chosen to ignore. But now, there was no ignoring it. This was who she had become, and I had to accept it. The turning point came when Samantha scheduled a meeting with a private investigator she trusted. The man, a no-nonsense professional named Harris, reviewed the evidence and offered to dig deeper. "I'll get you what you need," Harris said confidently. "If there's anything else out there, hidden accounts, undisclosed activities, I'll find it." True to his word, Harris uncovered additional details. Eric, as it turned out, had a history of manipulating wealthy partners for financial gain. He was no innocent player in this game. Armed with this new information, Samantha and I prepared to strengthen our case. If Rachel wanted to align herself with someone like Eric, she would have to face the consequences. The final step was preparing the divorce papers. Samantha drafted them with precision, ensuring that every clause protected my assets and exposed Rachel's actions. The documents included a detailed breakdown of the financial damages caused by her spending, evidence of her infidelity, supported by the tracker data and Harris's findings, a request for restitution, demanding that Rachel repay the funds she had taken from our joint accounts. By the time the papers were ready, I felt a sense of calm determination. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. Rachel had made her choices, and now she would have to answer for them. As I reviewed the final draft, Samantha looked at me with a knowing smile. "You've done everything right, Adam. Now it's time to serve her and let the process begin." The next morning, I made the call. The papers were delivered to Rachel at Eric's condo, where she had been hosting yet another social gathering. I could only imagine her reaction when she opened the envelope and saw the mountain of evidence against her. That evening, as I sat on my patio with a glass of whiskey, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in knowing I had taken control, but there was also a lingering sadness. This wasn't how I had envisioned my life. But sometimes, the only way to rebuild was to let the old structure crumble. I watched the sunset, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, and allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. This was just the beginning of the end, but it was a necessary step toward reclaiming my life. Rachel had played her game, but now it was my turn to set the rules. Rachel loved being the center of attention, and her latest social event was no exception. She had spent weeks planning an extravagant gathering at Eric's condo, a celebration of her new life. Or so she wanted everyone to believe. The guest list included a mix of mutual friends, new acquaintances, and social climbers eager to bask in the glow of perceived success. Rachel thrived on the illusion of perfection, but tonight, that illusion was about to shatter. I had been waiting for this moment. The evidence I had painstakingly gathered wasn't just for legal purposes. It was also for clarity, a way to strip away the facade Rachel had so carefully constructed. With Samantha's guidance, I had ensured that every detail was not only accurate but irrefutable. Tonight, the truth would come to light. The event was in full swing when I made my move. Rachel had posted about it relentlessly on social media, sharing photos of the lavish decor and gourmet catering. She wanted the world to see how well she was doing, how much better her life was without me. But beneath the glitz and glamour was a foundation built on lies. I sent the files anonymously to key individuals on the guest list. Mutual friends who had reached out to me with concern, acquaintances who had sided with Rachel without knowing the full story, and a few strategically chosen influencers who thrived on sharing scandals. The email was simple and to the point. Subject: the truth about Rachel. Dear recipient, I thought you deserved to know the reality behind the image Rachel is presenting. Attached, you'll find documented evidence of her actions, including financial records, infidelity, and her current relationship with Eric. This isn't about revenge, it's about honesty. Do with this information what you will. Best, anonymous. The attachments included screenshots of Rachel's spending sprees, photos of her and Eric in compromising situations, and financial statements that left no room for interpretation. I didn't embellish or editorialize. The facts spoke for themselves. It didn't take long for the ripple effect to begin. At first, I watched from afar as the messages and calls started pouring in. Mutual friends, stunned by what they had seen, began sharing the information among themselves. Within the hour, the news had reached the party. Rachel's laughter, so confident and carefree at the start of the evening, began to falter as whispers spread through the crowd. Guests glanced at their phones, exchanged incredulous looks, and slowly distanced themselves from her. The atmosphere grew tense, the buzz of conversation shifting from admiration to judgment. Eric, always eager to play the role of the charming host, tried to smooth things over. But even he couldn't ignore the growing unease. By the time someone finally confronted Rachel directly, the room had turned against her. Rachel, one of her closest friends, said, holding up her phone, "What is this?" Rachel's face paled as she scanned the screen. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "It's everywhere," another guest chimed in, their tone laced with disbelief. "We've all seen it." She looked around the room, her carefully crafted composure crumbling. "This is a mistake," she said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow. "Someone's trying to sabotage me." But the evidence was too damning to dismiss. As more people spoke up, questioning her actions and motives, Rachel's excuses grew weaker. Eric, sensing the tide turning, began to edge toward the door, his loyalty evaporating in the face of public scrutiny. Watching the fallout unfold from the comfort of my home, I felt a mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction, of course, a sense of vindication that came from knowing the truth was finally out. But there was also a pang of sadness. This wasn't how I had wanted my life to be. I had loved Rachel once, and part of me still mourned the woman I thought she was. By the end of the night, the party had all but disbanded. Rachel was left alone in the aftermath, her reputation in tatters and her supporters dwindling. Eric was gone, and the friends she had relied on to prop up her image had turned their backs. The next morning, I received a message from one of our mutual friends. "Adam, I don't know how you stayed so calm through all of this. I'm sorry for doubting you. Rachel's true colors are clear now, and she has no one to blame but herself." I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Thank you. It means a lot. I'm just glad the truth is out." With that, I closed my laptop and stepped outside, letting the crisp morning air wash over me. The exposure wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. Rachel's actions had consequences, and now the world knew the truth. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The weight of her betrayal was no longer mine to carry. The fallout from Rachel's public exposure was only the beginning. As the whispers turned to full-blown judgment and her carefully curated image crumbled, it was time to deliver the next decisive blow. The legal process had been meticulously prepared, and now it was ready to begin. The divorce papers were served to Rachel 3 days after her disastrous party. Samantha had ensured that the documents were airtight, detailing every instance of her financial irresponsibility and infidelity with painstaking precision. Each piece of evidence, from the bank statements to the tracker data, was carefully included, painting a clear picture of her betrayal. The papers were delivered to Eric's condo, where she had been staying since leaving our home. According to the process server, she answered the door with a mix of suspicion and arrogance. That expression quickly shifted to shock as she scanned the contents of the envelope. Her confidence faltered, replaced by a growing sense of dread. I didn't need to be there to imagine her reaction. I could picture her flipping through the pages, her smug facade cracking as the reality of her situation set in. She had always prided herself on being in control, but now she was facing the undeniable consequences of her actions. Later that day, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Rachel. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to answer. Finally, I picked up, keeping my tone calm and neutral. "Hello, Rachel." "Adam," she began, her voice tight with barely restrained anger. "What is this? Divorce papers? You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," I replied evenly. "The evidence is all there, Rachel. You can't deny what you've done." Her tone shifted, taking on a pleading edge. "Adam, this doesn't have to be so messy. We can talk about this. Work something out. Please, let's not do it this way." I sighed, refusing to let her manipulation affect me. "Rachel, I gave you every chance to come clean, to treat me with even a shred of respect. You chose to mock me, to betray me, and to flaunt it. This is the result of your choices." "But Adam," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "you don't understand." "Eric." "I don't care about Eric," I interrupted, my voice firm. "This isn't about him. It's about you and the decisions you made. The papers are filed. We'll let the lawyers handle it from here." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. "Instead," she said quietly, "I didn't think you had it in you." I let out a bitter chuckle. "That's the problem, Rachel. You underestimated me, just like you underestimated the consequences of your actions." The line went silent, and then she hung up. I set the phone down, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. There was satisfaction, yes, but also a lingering sadness. I had loved Rachel once, and despite everything, part of me mourned the loss of what we had. Over the next few weeks, the legal proceedings moved forward. Samantha handled the details with her usual efficiency, keeping me updated every step of the way. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed to be spiraling. Mutual friends reported that Eric had started pulling away, unwilling to deal with the backlash and the growing financial strain. Without his support, Rachel was left to face the storm alone. Her attempts to charm and manipulate me into reconsidering became increasingly desperate. She sent texts and emails, alternating between apologies and accusations. One moment she was begging for forgiveness, and the next, she was blaming me for everything that had gone wrong. I read each message carefully, not out of sympathy, but to document her erratic behavior. Samantha advised me to keep my responses short and professional, and I followed her advice. My replies were simple acknowledgments, sticking to the facts and refusing to engage with her emotional outbursts. Each interaction was another reminder of why I had made the right decision. The day of the first court hearing arrived, and I walked into the room feeling a mix of nerves and determination. Rachel was already there, her once polished appearance slightly frayed. She avoided eye contact as we took our seats on opposite sides of the room. Samantha presented our case with calm confidence, laying out the evidence with precision. Rachel's lawyer tried to counter, painting her as a victim of circumstance, but the facts were irrefutable. By the end of the session, it was clear which way the judge was leaning. When the hearing concluded, I walked out of the courtroom feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The legal blow had landed, and Rachel's attempts to evade responsibility were crumbling under the weight of the truth. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about closure. As I stepped into the fresh air outside, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. This chapter of my life was nearing its end, and for the first time, I was beginning to see the possibilities of what lay ahead. Rachel's downward spiral was almost surreal to witness. In the weeks following the court hearing, her life seemed to unravel with alarming speed. The carefully constructed facade she had built with Eric was now in ruins, and the reality of her choices was finally catching up to her. Eric, her younger, charismatic lover, was the first to go. The strain of public exposure, combined with Rachel's mounting legal troubles, proved too much for him. He distanced himself quietly at first, skipping calls and leaving messages unanswered. Then, one day, he was simply gone. Friends whispered that he had left town, eager to escape the fallout and the financial burden Rachel had become. Without Eric to lean on, Rachel's once flashy lifestyle came to an abrupt halt. The luxury condo she had shared with him was foreclosed, forcing her to move into a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. The designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the endless social events, all of it disappeared as she struggled to keep up with the restitution payments and legal fees. For someone who had prided herself on her image, it was a harsh reality to confront. Amidst her desperation, Rachel turned to the few people she thought might still support her. But the friends who had once fawned over her success now kept their distance, unwilling to associate themselves with her scandal. Calls went unanswered, doors were closed, and even her family's patience began to wear thin. Then, one evening, the call came. I recognized the number immediately but hesitated before answering. When I finally picked up, Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "Adam," she said, her tone filled with an unfamiliar vulnerability. "Can we talk?" I took a deep breath. "What is there to talk about, Rachel?" "Please," she said, her voice cracking. I need to see you. I need to explain." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her the next day at a coffee shop near her apartment. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished, confident woman I had once known. She looked tired, worn down by the weight of her choices. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting across from me. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her cup of coffee. "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. She looked down at her hands, as if gathering the courage to speak. "I've lost everything, Adam," she said finally. "Eric is gone. My friends won't talk to me. Even my family, they don't know what to do with me anymore." "And what does that have to do with me?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm sorry," she said, "for everything. For the way I treated you. For the things I said. I was wrong, Adam. I see that now." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the impact she seemed to hope for. I had spent months processing the pain she had caused, and while her apology was long overdue, it didn't change the past. "Rachel," I said, leaning forward slightly, "do you remember what you told me the day you left? You called me useless. You mocked me for trying to salvage our marriage. You chose Eric and everything he represented over the life we built together." She nodded, her tears spilling over. "I know," she said, her voice breaking, "and I hate myself for it. I thought I was making the right choice, but I was blind. Please, Adam, give me another chance. Let me make things right." I leaned back, letting her words sink in. There was a time when I might have wanted to hear this, to believe that we could fix what was broken. But that time had passed. "Rachel," I said softly, "I've moved on. I spent months picking up the pieces of my life after what you did. And in that time, I realized something. I'm better off without you." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, but I knew better than to let it sway me. "I hope you find peace," I continued. "I really do. But that peace doesn't include me. You made your choices, Rachel, and now you have to live with them." She didn't argue or plead further. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if finally accepting the reality of her situation. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you for meeting me." As she walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of closure. Rachel's desperation was a stark reminder of how far I had come. Her apology, while appreciated, was no longer something I needed. I had found my strength, and I wasn't about to let her pull me back into the chaos she had created. For the first time in years, I felt free. With Rachel finally out of my life, the world seemed brighter, lighter, and full of possibilities. Her desperate attempts to win me back had only solidified my resolve to move forward, leaving behind the toxic shadow of our relationship. For the first time in years, I could focus on myself without the weight of her criticism or betrayal holding me down. I started small, with the house. Every corner of it carried memories of Rachel, some good but many tainted by her cruelty and deceit. It was time to reclaim my space. I spent weeks repainting the walls, replacing furniture, and adding touches that reflected my own personality, not the pristine, sterile aesthetic she had always insisted on. The living room became a cozy haven with soft lighting and shelves filled with books I had been meaning to read. The kitchen, once a place of tension, was now bright and inviting, encouraging me to try my hand at new recipes. Friends and family noticed the change almost immediately. They were hesitant at first, unsure if I was truly ready to rebuild, or if this was just a temporary distraction. But as the weeks turned into months, their tentative support became genuine admiration. My parents, who had always kept their concerns about Rachel to themselves, expressed how proud they were to see me thriving. My sister, who had always been my fiercest defender, was my biggest cheerleader, sending me motivational texts and surprising me with little gifts to celebrate my progress. I also reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from during my marriage. Dinners, game nights, and casual meetups became regular occurrences, filling the void that Rachel had left behind. It felt good to laugh again, to share stories and create new memories with people who genuinely cared about me. Work became another source of fulfillment. Without the constant drama and emotional drain of my marriage, I found myself excelling in ways I hadn't anticipated. Projects that once felt like a chore now excited me, and I tackled challenges with renewed energy. My boss noticed the difference and rewarded me with a promotion, one that came with not just a raise, but also the recognition I had craved for years. As I settled into this new phase of life, I decided to take a step further and plan a vacation, something just for me. I chose a small coastal town I had always wanted to visit but never did because Rachel had deemed it boring. The trip was everything I needed: quiet mornings by the sea, afternoons spent exploring quaint shops and local cafes, and evenings watching the sunset with nothing but my thoughts for company. It was a reminder of how beautiful life could be when lived on my own terms. During this time, I also picked up old hobbies that I had abandoned. Music, for one. I dusted off my guitar, an instrument that had sat untouched in the corner of the bedroom for years, and found solace in its familiar strings. Writing became another outlet, a way to process everything I had been through. What started as a personal journal soon grew into essays and stories, some of which I shared online. To my surprise, they resonated with others who had experienced similar heartbreaks. Their messages of gratitude and support were both humbling and empowering. Rachel, meanwhile, had faded into the background of my life. Mutual acquaintances occasionally mentioned her, but I made it clear that I wasn't interested in updates. The last I had heard, she was still struggling to rebuild, her past choices continuing to cast a long shadow over her present. It wasn't something I took pleasure in. If anything, it was a cautionary tale that reinforced the importance of accountability and integrity. One evening, as I sat on my newly refurbished patio, sipping a glass of wine and watching the stars, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The pain of Rachel's betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it had become a part of my story, a chapter that taught me resilience and self-worth. Rebuilding my life wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. I had discovered strength I didn't know I had and found joy in places I had overlooked. Most importantly, I had learned to value myself, to prioritize my happiness, and to never settle for less than I deserved. As the night deepened, I made a promise to myself. This was just the beginning. The life I was building was mine and mine alone, and I couldn't wait to see what came next. Months had passed since Rachel's desperate attempt to win me back, and life had taken on a rhythm that felt steady and fulfilling. I had built something new for myself, a life free from her shadows, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was living on my own terms. So, when an email from Rachel appeared in my inbox one quiet afternoon, it caught me off guard. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to open it. My initial instinct was to delete it, to keep the distance I had worked so hard to create. But curiosity got the better of me. With a steadying breath, I clicked. The message was longer than I expected, filled with a mix of apologies, explanations, and confessions. Rachel admitted to everything: her betrayal, her selfishness, her cruelty, and expressed regret for the pain she had caused me. She detailed how her life had fallen apart since we parted ways, how Eric had abandoned her, and how she had struggled to piece things back together. Her words were laced with desperation, a plea for forgiveness and, perhaps, a second chance. But as I read through her message, I felt no anger, no sadness, no longing, only clarity. Her apology was sincere, but it was also too late. I had moved on, and her words, while meaningful, could not undo the damage she had caused. That evening, I sat down to write my response. I didn't rush it, taking my time to craft a message that was honest yet kind. Rachel deserved to know where I stood, but I wasn't going to let her drag me back into the past. Rachel, thank you for your message. I appreciate your apology and the courage it must have taken to write it. I believe your regret is genuine, and I hope it helps you find the closure you're seeking. However, I've moved forward with my life, and I've worked hard to build something meaningful for myself. The person I am now is no longer tied to the pain of our past, and while I forgive you, I cannot give you the second chance you're asking for. I wish you peace and happiness as you continue your journey. Take care. Adam. Hitting send felt like releasing the final tether to a chapter of my life that had been both painful and transformative. I didn't expect a reply, and none came. That silence was its own kind of closure, a mutual understanding that our paths had truly diverged. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. Rachel's betrayal had shattered me, but it had also pushed me to rediscover my strength. Her actions forced me to confront the parts of myself I had neglected, to rebuild my identity from the ground up. In a strange way, I was grateful for the experience, not for the pain it caused, but for the growth it inspired. One evening, as I walked along the beach near my vacation spot, I felt a profound sense of peace. The waves lapped gently against the shore, the salty breeze carrying away the remnants of doubt and bitterness that had lingered for far too long. I had found closure not in Rachel's apology, but in the life I had created despite her. When I returned home, I placed her email in a folder labeled Past, a quiet acknowledgement of where it belonged. It wasn't something I needed to revisit, but it also wasn't something I needed to erase. It was a part of my story, one that had shaped me into the person I was today. Rachel's email was unexpected, but it served as a reminder of how far I had come. I had chosen to move forward, to embrace the possibilities of the future, and to leave the pain of the past behind. And in doing so, I had found a peace that no apology could ever provide. The morning sun streamed through the windows of my home, a space that now reflected who I had become. The walls were no longer sterile reminders of a past life. They were vibrant, warm, and uniquely mine. As I sipped my coffee, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey I had taken, even with all its pain and heartache. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one that I was writing entirely on my own terms. Work had become more than just a career. It was a passion. My recent promotion allowed me to lead projects that challenged and excited me, and I thrived in the respect and trust my colleagues placed in me. Every day was a reminder of how far I had come, not just professionally but personally. The man who once doubted his worth now walked into every room with confidence and purpose. Outside of work, my life flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. The small community I had rebuilt around me, friends, family, and even new acquaintances, provided a support system that felt unshakable. I had reconnected with old hobbies and discovered new ones, each adding a layer of joy and fulfillment to my days. Music filled my evenings, writing became a therapeutic outlet, and travel opened my eyes to worlds I had long ignored. One of the most rewarding aspects of this new beginning was sharing my story. What started as private journaling evolved into something more public. I began writing articles and essays about resilience, betrayal, and the power of rebuilding. To my surprise, they resonated with people from all walks of life. Emails poured in from readers who found solace and inspiration in my words. Some shared their own stories, while others simply thanked me for reminding them that healing was possible. The recognition felt humbling. An editor from a well-known online platform reached out, offering me the chance to contribute regularly. Before long, my writings gained traction, leading to invitations for speaking engagements and even the prospect of publishing a book. What had started as a way to process my pain had turned into a way to help others navigate their own. As life unfolded, I allowed myself to dream again. I dreamed of new places to explore, new skills to learn, and new relationships to build. The scars from my past didn't vanish, but they no longer defined me. Instead, They served as reminders of my strength, of the battles I had fought and won. One crisp autumn afternoon, I stood on a hill overlooking the city, the skyline bathed in golden light. It was a view I had always loved, but rarely taken the time to appreciate. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace. My journey wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I felt fully in control of where it was heading. Rachel was a distant memory now, a chapter closed with finality. I no longer thought of her with anger or regret. If anything, I felt a strange sense of gratitude. Her betrayal had been the catalyst for my transformation, the push I needed to rediscover myself. She had shown me what I didn't want in life, and in doing so, she had helped me clarify what I did. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. This is only the beginning. The best is yet to come.